The following show is brought to you in part by support from Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Cerisi. We don't just practice law, we make history. Online at rkmc.com.
Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest tonight. Michael Osterholm is back with me. We were reminiscing about having done a few interviews in the past. He is not only a Minnesota leader, a United States leader, but a leader in the field of public health internationally. So I'm very pleased he could come down and talk with me about pandemics and about his work and about his life and about leadership. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank you, Mary. It's great to be here.
You are the director of a center at the U called the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy. And I want to just stop and have you, in a sentence, Mike, define what the goals of that group are.
Well, I spent much of my career doing the science of public health and infectious diseases, trying to understand how diseases are transmitted and how to stop that transmission. But oftentimes it often came down not to the science, but to the policy. You know, what would government be able to do, or what would the private sector do, or how would people interact with you in terms of trying to carry out a public health program? And so what this center really is the marriage of the science and public health. I often liken it to chocolate and peanut butter running into each other in a dark hallway. You know, it's kind of the perfect match. And so what we do is try to make change.
Science and policy.
Right, we mix them together. So you got to have good science, but until you can make something happen in policy, you don't really affect public health.
That's an exciting concept. And how long have you been director? It's not a long, long time.
Yeah, I came actually 4 days before 9/11.
Oh, it's
to the
been
university.
That long already.
So yeah, 2001, and it was, and we were very involved at that time with the idea of bioterrorism and so forth. And so right as the center opened, of course, then we were merged into the 9/11 events.
Well, we'll come back and talk about bioterrorism later, but I want to also just tell you a little bit more about Mike. I could really spend about half the interview reading about and sharing with you his bio, but you're a professor in 3 departments at the U, adjunct professor in the medical school. He's on the National Science Advisory Board on Biosecurity. You were the state epidemiologist from 84 to 99, roughly.
Right, yeah.
15 years. He has written a lot. He's the author of about 315 papers and abstracts, several book chapters. And this is what makes me think, how does he do it? He's a consultant to the World Health Organization, the CDC, the Defense Department. You were an advisor to the King of Jordan. And you said 170,000 miles in the airplane on average the last many years, right?
Yep.
So busy man. Let's go back with my leaders. I like to always find out some about what you were like as a boy, what your parents did. Just describe your childhood for us.
Well, actually, I was born and raised in a small farm town in northeast Iowa, just 20 miles south of the Minnesota border. I was the oldest of 6 kids, and I actually had not a atypical childhood, but I grew up in a family with a father that was a very abusive alcoholic. And I learned very early on about leadership because you had to do that when you had that kind of a situation.
So you became kind of the leader of the gang of the children, the 6
Yeah, I
kids.
did, and also it really the start, you might say, of my career, because it turned out that in that small town, my father worked for a newspaper, and the owners of the newspaper, a husband and wife team, the wife, who was actually 46 years older than I was, so truly was almost really a grandmother-like figure, was a true Renaissance person, and she played a very, very important role in my life. She more or less adopted me at a very early age. And she actually subscribed to the New Yorker. And the New Yorker as a magazine was not something that people in Iowa were very familiar with. But in that New Yorker magazine was a series of articles that were written from time to time by a gentleman by the name of Burton Roget called The Annals of Medicine. And it was all whodunit mystery stories about medical detectives. And so at 5th grade, I was reading those, and I couldn't wait until she was done with her copy of the New Yorker if there was an article by Burton Roget in there. And that really is what whetted my appetite for the whole area of infectious disease and medical detective work.
So it started really early, Mike,
Yeah.
didn't it?
When I went to college,
Interesting.
I knew I wanted to go into this area. And
That's
it was a
unusual.
pull and a tug, because actually I had done a fair amount of work in the area of oceanography during my college summer years in Florida working in the manatee, and I at one point actually thought about going into oceanography, but the pull and tug for the medical detective work was too much. So when I started undergraduate, I knew I wanted to be an epidemiologist, and at that time most people had never even heard of what that was.
No, I
So
bet
I
not.
had that dream to be that.
Did your parents, did your grandparents, family, did this wonderful woman in Iowa, did they live to see you become successful and respected?
Well, I'm still working on trying to make sure I'm successful. Okay, it's my kids, I guess, that I worry about that. You know, my mother's still alive. She understands it. I jokingly tell the story, though, that the Iowa small town kind of mindset. Back in 1980, as you may recall, our group was the one that discovered the early work with toxic shock syndrome and the relationship with tampons. And in that very first
That's when we
month,
probably first became aware of what an epidemiologist
you probably
did.
were. But I'll never forget this good small town Irish Catholic woman. My mother's Orion. And I was going to be on Good Morning America the next morning, and you may recall David Hartman, the old Dr. Kildare. He was at that time the host of Good Morning America, and she loved him. So I'm actually at the Minneapolis airport calling her saying, "Mom, guess what? I'm going to New York. I'm going to be in Good Morning America tomorrow." She was so excited. She, wanted Aunt Ruby and Uncle Matt and everybody to hear about it. And then when she asked me what I was going to talk about, I said toxic shock syndrome. And there was this long, pregnant pause. And she said, "You're not going to talk about those tampons on TV, are you?" And at that point, she started praying for a power shortage in town the next day. So she's had to put up with a number of these issues with me, where she's been very proud on one hand. On the other hand, she wishes I wouldn't deal with some of the things I deal with.
That's a great story. When you think of all the epidemiologists that are in our country, and you think of the respect that you are given and have achieved, why do you think, what qualities do you think, Mike, that you have, and this is not a Minnesota Midwestern type question, but why do you think you've risen to the top to be a consultant to our governmental agencies as you are, to be the man that 60 Minutes wants when we have a flu epidemic?
Mary, I think it's a combination of factors. I think the first one, which is really critical, is that I always have said epidemiology is a team sport. And while I often am recognized for the work that our group does, it really is a group effort. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of, the senior leadership team at CIDRAP, where I'm at now at the university, all of those people have now been with me for at least 30 plus years. Mm-hmm. And so when I left health program, they actually came with me to the university. Wow. And I think that is what it's really all about in a lifetime. When you can work with colleagues like that for that long,
have each other's back.
Yeah, you have
right?
each other's back, and they keep you humble and honest, but they're always there for you. So that's number one. I think number two is the fact that it's kind of this appetite for the future, just trying to figure out. I mean, the world has changed a lot since we both got into our businesses. I mean, imagine when you first started in this area in communications and how it's changed. Right. And I think that one of the things that I've always found interesting is that kind of change. And then the final thing, I think, which has really
curiosity
is one of them.
part of that.
Yeah. But
second
I think
one.
the final thing for me is, I'm very fortunate to have 4 children today and 2 grandchildren. And none of this really matters at all, except for what it means for our children. And today, I look at the lens of what I do and what I care about in the world, not from what it's about me or us or today. It's really about what the hell are we doing in this world for our kids?
How can we make it safer?
Better. And so to me, this is really easy to do my job, because my whole goal is, I can ask myself quite honestly, and it doesn't sound Pollyannish, but what will this do about my grandson? Will this make, what are we doing here to make a difference?
There are some scary statistics as you so well know, about life maybe not being better for our kids in terms of our environment, in terms of, bacteria, et cetera, et
right, right.
cetera. So that is a driving motivation, it sounds like, in a
You
big,
know,
big way.
yeah, at the risk, I know some of your audience probably doesn't want to hear this because they're part of this, but I'm a baby boomer. And the baby boomers are going to turn the world over to the next generation for the first time in history in worse shape than we acquired it from our previous generation. We've used resources in a way that is not sustainable. We have really mortgaged the future for our kids. And remember when we were younger and at a time when we all said, boy, we're going to solve the problems of the world. We came off Vietnam War protests with the idea that the world was going to be a peaceful place. We were going to get to the moon and show just what great things we could do. And where did we get lost along the way? And it's not that we don't do good things and we're a great country and it's a great world, but we have some really huge challenges before us. And I think just in the area of infectious diseases, think about this. Today, with the 7.2 billion people on the face of the earth, 1 of every 8 people who's ever lived, dating back to the caves, is on the earth right now. And if you want to create a way to make infectious bugs grow and have them mutate quickly and turn into things you don't want them to, just create the megalopolises of the developing world. I've been in apartment buildings in Hong Kong, 28,000 people in one apartment building. So when you want to know, want to know how a virus like SARS virus can suddenly take off and spread quickly, just look at that. Just not long ago, I was in Hyderabad, India at 2 o'clock on one morning, and I gave a lecture at the University of Minnesota that night. It just shows how fast we can get around the world now and what gets around the world. So we've created a lot of challenges that way for us, and we need to think about that.
Do you think part of it, too, is a letting down of some kind of social consciousness that goes along with all the, pace of living in the smallness of the world now? Do you think there's something also just ethically that's not clicking for the baby boomer generation?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about selfishness.
That's what I
worry about that desperately because we keep asking about what's in it for us. A good example today, healthcare is clearly a driving force in terms of our federal deficit. We can't sustain what we're doing with Medicare. And, we have many people say, well, then you want to get old people off that. No, but the bottom line is today, if there is a drug that's available at $30,000 that can keep you alive for an extra 3 weeks with your cancer, should you have a right to that drug? When, in fact, what you're doing is taking that money away from your kids and grandkids. Healthcare costs are unsustainable today. We're continually trying to find better mousetraps to accomplish what? When you think about this, there are top 10 causes of death. And if we eliminate those top 10, there'll be 10 new ones. And I'm not sure the 10 new ones are going to be any better than the 10 we have. And so what we ought to figure out, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all live to the point of a ripe old age where we're of sound mind, we're physically well, and then one day, while I'm out fly fishing, I have a heart attack and fall flat and face in the water with a big smile on it. Do not count my heart attack as one of the top 10 causes of death that was bad. Now, if I live in pain and I suffer and I cost a great deal to my family, both in terms of money to in times of effort, now that's what I want to avoid. So, I almost think we ought to find the top 10 causes of death we want to have and work for them. and because we're all going to die.
It's another way to view things here.
Yeah, and then to me, that's where the selfishness comes in. We can't have everything. And healthcare is going to be one of them. It's going to be a very real challenge.
I hope we get into the debate in a honest and thoughtful and intense way as you're giving us some ideas to go. What has been the biggest challenge for you as an epidemiologist, as a leader in public health, Mike? Some people call you an alarmist. Has that been a problem? Has that made people turn away and not listen to the degree they should? Or what would you say challenges you the most?
Yeah, I think that's a label that I've had for many years. And, it sounds very self-serving to say this, but I go back to anybody and say, show me one thing that I ever said that didn't happen. I wrote that book that you have here. It was published on 9/11 of 2000, talking about why even just a few anthrax spores could cause a real problem in terms of a crisis and so forth. And so I think that The idea that you talk about these things is not meant to be a hoary story and to try to scare people. It's to, if anything, is to try to make them think about what can we do about it. We've been more recently challenging issues around, for example, how well the influenza vaccine works. We don't do that because we're trying to bash vaccines. It's because we need new and better flu vaccines, and we became complacent. We thought the ones we had were good enough. We just had to get more people vaccinated. That isn't so. And in a year like this year, where we're seeing an increased number of deaths in those 65 years of age and older, we're going to have data that shows that the vaccine didn't work at all in that age group.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Oh, I thought we were at 30%
Well,
or
actually,
something.
we're going to be at 42%, I think, by year's end
For
the
all-
overall population, and most of that's in
overall.
younger, healthy adults. And when you get to the older age population, we don't have evidence it worked at all. And yet we've been pushing that. Well, so it's not to call people wrong because people thought that it was working, but it should be a clarion call why we need new and better vaccines. So I think, when you look back at anything that we ever talked about, or made the predictions for, it wasn't to scare people, it was to say we got to get ready for this. And
get
I
people's
think when I was
attention.
on this show last time, we talked about antibiotic resistance and the problems that were happening. Today is front page news all the time. We are seeing an increased number of infections we literally can't treat today. And we're running out of the antibiotics that we've had now since World War II. The bugs are winning.
When you think about this, and this was on my list too to ask you, what's on the horizon in terms of dealing with this issue? Because it scares me a lot if we only have a couple go-to drugs.
Yeah.
And that's not going to work.
Well, we thought when we had the microbial genomics revolution a few years ago, we could do all this work where we could figure out every gene in a microbe, and that it would allow us to basically develop new drugs, and that has not materialized. So we're really living off a pipeline of a real few class of drugs in terms of how they work. When we try to kill a microbe, whether it's a bacteria or a parasite or a virus, we basically go after one specific mechanism. So when they're building their cell wall or they're using energy, how can we interface with that? And when you think about this, a microbe like an E. coli bacteria has a new generation every 20 minutes, 3 times an hour. Multiply that by a day, then by a month, then a year, and you realize just in the time that you and I have been alive, these bacteria have had many, many, many thousands of generations upon which to have a mutation that is a defect in the reproduction of the organism, but it may be the perfect defect that gets around what was previously killing it. And that's what's happened. And so we're living off of a very limited time period of gifts from these antibiotics. And as one of my mentors, a former Nobel Prize laureate, who unfortunately is no longer with us, once said, Josh Lederberg, the bugs were here before us, they were here while we're here, and they're going to be here after we're gone. And I think that that's a truism, and we're finding that more and more and more. Today we have horrible stories of drug-resistant TB around the world that we can't treat anymore.
Do you think more and more people then are just going to be dying because of bacterial infections that we can't treat?
We're clearly going to
Is
see that. Plus, we're going back now and looking at old mechanisms that we used back in the 20s and 30s. I mean, treatments with serum treatments, for example, where you would take somebody who had recovered from the infection, recover their blood, and try to transfuse the part of the blood that was successful. Another thing called phage types. Phages are viruses that actually infect bacteria.
Phage.
Right. And we're now, and we had done work on that in the 30s and 40s, and it kind of went away. We're now actually going back and pulling out the old pre-antibiotic era treatment issues to look at them carefully to say, well, maybe we can use this. So I don't think people realize that this is one area where modern technology is clearly been outpaced by the microbial genetics and the evolution of these microbes.
And we're losing ground fast.
Yeah, it is. We are. We have hospital-based infections today where they're highly resistant. I mean, the last place you want to be today is in a hospital because it has become a reservoir for many of these very, very bad bugs just among the patients there and in the environment there. And so, yeah, that's not to scare people. Let's just say that's the reality.
When we got together last time, Mike, we did talk about your book, Living Tears, and I'll hold it up at the end of the show. But I remember you said to me, the thing that kept you awake at night back then was the smallpox scare. And is that still on your radar?
yes and no. And I say no in the sense that, we worried it was in the hands of other entities besides the U.S. and the former Soviet Union, Russia now. And I am feeling more confident that if rogue scientists or governments have it, that it's never going to come out or be used there. But on the other hand, what I'm really concerned about since I was here last is the whole pace of technology development for how you can make organisms, meaning that genetically today we have the capability to take the genetic fingerprint of that organism and actually assemble it like Legos. And in fact, just recently, several years ago, somebody actually took the entire genetic fingerprint or footprint of the polio virus and created it de novo, meaning they literally assembled it in their lab. The virus grew, they put it into animals, and it caused the same illness as normal paralytic polio virus. Well, we published the entire genetic sequence of the smallpox virus many years ago, thinking that, oh, hell, nobody can ever do this because it's a very big, complicated virus. I worry that someday we're now in the position, and we've just come through a year's debate about this with the bird flu virus, where man has made it. And this work that I'm involved with on the national board looking at this area is somebody's going to reproduce the smallpox virus one day, and they'll be able to do it. And we are there. I mean, when you think about the laptop you have today, that exceeded all the computing power General Motors had in 1972. Now look what you have, you walk around with it, okay?
Right.
So we're doing the same thing with microbial genetics and the ability to make and deal with these things, and there are many good things that come out of that. There are things that we are learning about these microbes, but I worry that if smallpox will return, I think it's going to be really a Frankenstein virus someday out of somebody's laboratory.
And could be used then in horrible, horrible ways. How do you think we best, as a world population, get ahead of those kind of scary things? Does it need to be done via the WHO, the World Health Organization, the United Nations? I mean, how do we come at it in a way that is most effective, do you think?
Well, Mary, we've just gone through this period, struggled with it, and we don't have the answers. You may remember that in the fall of 2011, a Dutch scientist came forward and said they've now created the bird flu virus in a way that by genetically changing it, they could make it readily transmissible through mammals, which of course is humans, that's what we are. And the limiting factor so far in keeping the bird flu virus, H5N1, from becoming a pandemic virus where it just spreads around the world is it's not readily transmissible from person to person. So when we do have cases, and we've just had a whole series of cases in the last month in Asia, occur when humans are having contact with sick birds, and they then get infected, and it's a very limited infection. It doesn't move on to other people. What these scientists did is figured out how it might move to other people in the name of science, trying to figure out, can we predict when it's going to happen? But what they didn't realize by doing that and publishing that information, you've just laid a blueprint out there for others on how to make this virus move easily between people. And so as part of my work on the National Science Advisory Board on Biosecurity, we've wrestled with this. And there isn't a good answer yet, because there's this idea that the way you improve science is to do the work and publish it. Some of us would say, well, that's true to a degree. On the other hand, with these tools we now have that you can go buy and use in high school microbiology laboratories for very limited cost, if they can make this because now you've given them the entire blueprint, that's not a good deal. So we don't have answers right now. This is a problem.
So sharing knowledge is good and bad. Good people get it and do good with it. Bad people get it and can do horrible things with it.
Right. Well, it's not even just bad people. One of the problems we have is good people who are well-intended. But today, these viruses are easily escapable from a laboratory. And we've had numerous examples where we thought they were well contained, but there was something in an engineering basis, or somebody left vents open, and then they got out and people got infected. And once the flu virus gets out, it's gone. It's like having a screen door on your submarine. You're sunk, okay? And we know that we won't contain it. If smallpox got out today, or if SARS got out today, we would have worldwide transmission for weeks to months, but we would contain it. Once influenza's out, it's gone. In 2009, when the new pandemic strain emerged in Mexico, within 28 days, we had documented that virus in 42 different countries.
Wow.
So, I
knew
mean, it moves at the speed of
moved fast,
airplanes.
but I don't remember the statistic. Oh my gosh.
So that's what we worry about, is even if good people do it. And remember, there are many laboratories around the world that don't have the same safety standards that we do in our government-supported labs here. We have vaccine manufacturers for animal vaccines around the world. I've been in some of these facilities, and you know, you and I wouldn't even want to visit them because of the conditions. So it's really one that we worry that, are we enabling groups of people who even don't have ill intent? But it gets out, and
Right.
once it's out, it's gone.
So
Once Pandora's box is opened, it's over.
accidental accident.
Yep, that's it.
Oh gosh. Well, there's lots to talk about and lots to worry about and lots for you to consult around the world about, isn't there? Oh.
I think that's the message here is, you know, we're not here just to talk about it. We're here to actually try to do something about it, to try to improve it, all these things. We're working on new flu vaccines. We're trying to figure out how to do this work carefully. You know, we want to find out ways to stop these infections that are antibiotic resistant. What do we do about it? You've just heard in the past week the issue, now we have vaccine resistant strains of pertussis, where the bacteria is actually mutated so that the part of the vaccine that worked against it in the past doesn't work anymore. That's a challenge. If I'd been on this show 2 years ago, I'd have said a vaccine-resistant strain of something, you know. So we have lots of challenges.
Do you envision yourself working until you do, as you said, fall in the creek fly fishing, or just keep going with
Well,
your
you know, if
research?
they can use my body, I'll keep working after I'm dead, you know, if they can do it. So I don't mind. Yeah, I do. I mean, my work
You're
is
so
a
excited
joy.
about it.
It is. I mean, it's something I appreciate. I love working with the people I work with. I love being at the University of Minnesota. I've had tremendous support there. It's been a great place to grow this operation. I head up a center for influenza research and surveillance supported by the NIH. And we have research going on in countries all around the world. We have many young people in training that we are working on. So these are all very exciting things for us. So as long as that stays like that, you know, I can't imagine slowing down.
Well, thank you so much for what you have done and are doing and will be doing, and for coming down and taking out a little time tonight to share with our viewers what you are working on and your excitement.
Well, thank you. And as I said to you earlier, there's two kinds of people in the world, those that have been on the Mary Hanson show and those that want to be. So thank you very much.
And I have a quote for you. David Williams, who is a wonderful physician here in the city and has been on the show, said, "You are a state treasure," and I would concur. So,
well, thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.